Ser du jag live nu, gubben? YouTube.
Nej.
Jack, shut up! Shut up! Shut up! Vet du vad jag har för länk? Jack, shut up! Shut up! Your channel. I'm live right now. Vet du vad jag har för länk?
Jag ser inte det online.
Det är jag. Det är jag. Uppdatera den automatiskt.
Devnus är offline, står det. Har du ett nytt konto eller?
Nej. Nej, det har jag inte.
Devnus är offline. Ja, du streamar ju fan på YouTube.
Ja. Yeah.
Ja, men vad fan. Där är jag.
Twitch är så dålig kvalitet. Gör man.
Fan, jag trodde du skulle köra MVN. Jag vet inte någon random. Kör mot random, då.
Fan vad högt det är. Ja, jag har inte det. Sänk det. Där är lite ensam.
Det var F24, ja.
Det är inte dålig bana. Jag kommer inte kunna springa över.
Kan du inte byta?
Next one. Ja, så är jag bra. Nu blir det hemskt.
Hela delayen alltså, den är fan lång.
Jag är inne i det huset.
alltså det är typ 1 minut fucking delay.
Är det?
Ja. Riktigt jävla lång delay. 30-36 sekunder.
Vad har hänt? Fy fan vad det är med man. Man har varit mycket roligare att springa ut. Oh! Vem? Kom förbi. Nej. Man måste bara hålla bro. Det går inte springa över. Nej! Det är bra. Ja, det var han. Det är det. Flyter det, Gabbe? Det är väldigt bra. Det är samma bana, ja.
Delayen suger.
Det är så suger när man springer in i en annan spelars pass. Hallå, spel. Jävlar vad jag lyfter. Ah! Tack för den. Jag var död. Nej, den tar mig. Inte roligt. Inte roligt, va? Inte roligt. Nej, men vad fan flyttar dig? Men nu då? Fan vad rädd jag blev. Vad var han gubben? Nu pushar man en fucking igen. Åh, jag tittar bak. Herregud!
Så inte varit.
Ja, det är ju ingen vidare. Där står jag. Nej! Jag har inte gått ut med nästa. Nej. Vad dålig mapp. Skit. Vad kan man se över oss? Han är ju där. Ja, men hur dålig är jag? Inget vidare. Inget att göra.
Hallå?
Salam. Salam alaikum.
Jag kan se nu.
Ja, det gick ingen vidare. Fy fan, jag klarade det bara.
Vadå? Du dödade någon ny eller?
Nej, det blev inte.
Vänta, va?
Ja, det är samma 3 omgångar. Eller,
Du har inte fixat delayen eller?
jag vet inte om man gör. Kan du googla?
Det är väl på OBS?
Den är bra, den mappen. Ja, det är det. OBS, vi ska kolla. Det visar ett spel också.
Jag tror det är... Vad kan det vara? Kanske 30 sekunder off?
Vad kan det vara? Output. Replay buffer. Jag vet inte vad inställningen skulle vara. Delay.
Ja. Ja. Okej, det är 24 sekunder till dig. Kolla på din timer.
Vad är det? Det jag hör inte. Jag kommer inte. Är det mat?
Det är mode.
Alltså jag har inte sett en chef. Ja, det är alltid ryggen. Stå och håller vinkeln på ditt fega borta. Sprungit runt hela facken. Det var dåligt. Nej. Det där är en till hora där nere.
Jag vet inte.
Fitta då! Ibland kan man bara missa. Oj, det är dåligt! Nej! Har jag en kill? Usch vad dåligt tycker jag. Jag ska visa vad skåpet ska stå när han är färdig med sin jävla. När han är färdig med sin jävla.
Jag hoppas det är en kort raid. Jag är inte jättesugen på raid idag.
Knivar. Aj.
Digen.
Ja, men.
Kan du inte testa att köra mini då?
Jag vet, du kan ju inte ha det. Ja. Det här var nice. Jag är redan till livet.
Har du vapen?
Ja, ett helt gäng på andra sidan. Nej, det är mig där.
Jävlar, nej. Varför har man nej till det här?
Vad sa du?
Varför har man nej till det här?
Hector! Vem skjuter mig nu? Står de där?
Man har bara har du bara ett hjälm och ett väst? airdrop?
Eller är det kul? Nej.
Knockar du döden polare?
Nej, det är min kul.
Ja, jag tror det.
Nej, whip.
Jo, du dödade din polare. Nej, han sprang rakt in i den.
Nej, du springer.
Det är ganska dumt att springa på en nej.
Sa du?
Ganska dumt att springa på en nej.
Nej, fy fan. Det var lite... Alltså, det är helt annan voice idag. Det ska jag göra lite mer. Det ska jag göra lite mer. We won me, bitch.
Ja, nu vann.
Vad sa du? Train? Sen.
Han har bara dött 4 gånger, så då, alltså, de som har dött 3 och 4 står de bara längst bak, eller?
Ja, förmodligen.
Men som är 18 kills och 3 deaths.
Så någon sniper. Som... Quest, eller? Vem som helst startar banan. Nej, det kan man inte.
Kan du inte?
Jag vet inte. TP är uppbetalt. Såklart. Alla är löst det.
Och du måste ha en plus för att creata.
Jaha, vi har ju plus.
Men tryck på creata nere till vänster då.
Där! Fan, du är så jävla... Fan vad du är så jävla kul. Bara väck mig till. Platoonback. Max players.
Harakin.
TPP blev det igen.
Nej.
Kan man ändra settings?
Varför byter de till TPP?
Gjorde den det igen?
Ja, men jag ligger ju efter.
Ja. Match settings. Public Europe. Settings. Preset. Jag fattar inte om man är så. Jag kommer sätta upp...
Varför kan inte Apex ju ha såna här då?
Jag vet inte, det är så tungt. M24...
Så löjligt att bara så här turneringar och typ större streamers bara använder det.
Ja, att det finns.
Ja. Jag kommer ihåg i början när det var Apex-turnering och kommer du ihåg det när vi körde? Och man bara hamnade, det är random kö.
Nej.
Du och jag Taffe. Tänk om man har dragit ner sin så här hidden MMR då. Man möter bara potatisar.
Ja, det skulle man ju gjort. Eh,
Jävlar, du bara 3x på många grejer.
Jag sätter det på allt.
Vad fan?
Bort.
Det kommer vara loot överallt.
Tror du det? Multigläder kan bara gå.
Spike trap kan du ta bort.
Nej.
Fan ska de med den till? Ja, du kan inte dra fordon över ett.
Tar väl du för mycket plats kanske. För att det är fasta språng.
Jo, men om man tog ner någonting till 0 kanske.
Max. Okej.
Fan vad så här jobbigt att dra allt.
Not enough players.
Nej.
Max players.
Måste man vara minst 2 eller?
Säkert. Friendly fire. Carry limit eller unlimited. Är det unlimited by default? Ja, det är det såklart. Jag har sett ut för max en granat. Eh, 10 damage. 10.
Ja, man bara får typ en av varje granat.
Det är bara HS som gör det. Rectangle. En circle town. Care package. Nummer 3. Nummer 5.
Jag skulle typ behöva dra.
Dra du. Fan, jag inte kan testa det.
Invites börjar nu.
Men du kan komma in på att testa det. Vi har det igång samtidigt.
Nej, men jag kan inte logga in snabbis.
Klabbegabbe heter den.
Kan inte gå och skita innan raid.
Mhm.
Skickar du en invite eller?
Det får du söka ut. En klävegäbb heter den.
Jag kan inte bara invita.
Hur invite?
Kan inte göra det på Steam typ? Eller längst ner till höger. Är du offline?
Du är offline.
Nej.
Jag är online.
Hur söker jag ens?
Custom. Så var det team deathmatch. Nej, normal mode. Team battle. Navigate public.
The player is not in a joinable game mode.
What? Fick du ut den? Navigate.
Trycker på den men det händer ingenting.
Antar jag lugnt in.
Du är observer står det.
Vad sa du?
Det står att du är observer.
Jag hoppade in där.
Hur gör man sköter
Not enough players. Hur många måste man vara då?
Ja.
Det suger. Varför är det så? Hur många måste man vara? Måste man fylla hela?
I don't know.
Ja. Tack för att du testade. Ha det.
Ja, jag känner hej. Ha det, hej.
Hallå där! Vad är det som händer i trappan? Age of Umquire.
Yes, Your Honor, is Elizabeth Mars.
Mars, M-A-R-S?
M-A-R-Z.
M-A-R-Z, thank you.
All right.
Please state your full name for the record.
Elizabeth Ray Mars.
Between the time that you lived in New York, so let's say 2007, 2008 through 2015, 16, how many times would you estimate that you saw Ms. Heard?
I don't remember.
More than 4 times?
No.
In 2015 and 16, do you recall how close you and Ms. Pennington were as friends?
Yeah, we were pretty close. Pretty close.
In your previous testimony, I'll represent to you, Ms. Mars, that you testified that at least in July of 2016, you would communicate with Ms. Pennington weekly.
I don't remember. Maybe at that time, perhaps we were communicating. Like I said, there were moments where we were communicating weekly or daily.
Would you agree with me that you would remember something as significant as one of your girlfriends telling you, somebody you've known since Texas, when you were young girls, you would remember if Ms. Heard told you that her husband or fiance or boyfriend was beating her? You would remember that, correct? And your testimony is that you only lived at the Eastern Columbia building in February of 2016 for 2 weeks?
It was around 2 weeks. I don't know the specific amount of time, but it was definitely a little over 2 weeks, less than a month. And yes.
And when you stayed at the Eastern Columbia building, did you stay in one of the penthouses?
Yes.
Okay. And did you understand that that penthouse was owned by Mr. Depp at the time?
I assumed it was, yes.
And for what purpose did you go to the Eastern Columbia building on May 21st, 2016?
To assist Raquel in getting ready for a bead show that she was going to be doing the following day.
Did you ever see Mr. Depp be violent towards anyone?
I experienced him that night as like I was scared of him. So that's all I can say from the moment that the one interaction I had with him that night, it was.
Did you hear old Joe has a new spokesperson? Jen Psaki left the sinking ship of the Biden administration, which is a smart move actually, to go work for MSNBC. And so the new woman who's going to be receiving softballs from everybody in the press, except for Peter Doocy, is Karine Jean-Pierre. And like most LGBT people, she feels she needs to tell everybody that she is one every single day. Here she is the first day on the job.
I am a black, gay, immigrant woman, the first of all 3 of those to hold this position. I would not be here today if it were not for...
If it were not for you being a diversity hire. Yeah, we know. And like all black liberals, she's obsessed with making baseless accusations about white people.
Racism, sexism, misogyny, all of that, homophobia, xenophobia, we connect it to Donald Trump, but it existed before Donald Trump. Racism was here before Donald Trump, and sadly, it will be here after Donald Trump. If it walks like a racist, talks like a racist, acts like a racist, it is a racist. And we have a racist president in the White House who really pushes his racism like a peacock.
Donald Trump is the first president to have purposefully has made racism the center of his campaign, of his administration, clearly.
I think Donald Trump wants to get rid of legal immigration, and it's because of people who come from brown and black countries. They want to put up these awful votes.
Former President Trump responding to the revelations from the Durham probe as one testimony claims Hillary Clinton knew about the unvetted claims against him.
That's right, and the former president telling Fox News, this is one of the greatest political scandals in history. For 3 years, I had to fight her off and fight those crooked people off. You'll never get your reputation fully back. Where do I go to get my reputation back? Great question.
That's a good question. Fox News contributor Sean Duffy is here to react to that. One of the things that I'm fascinated with, Sean, is how did Robert Mueller not know about all of this that's in this investigation?
I think that's a great question. But first, when he says, you know, she was on me for 3 years, I kind of feel like Hillary Clinton was a cage fighter in the way he describes her, and like just, you know, punching the heck out of him. But you're right. I think if you're listening to the testimony today and over the week of the Sussman trial, it becomes apparently clear that the FBI knew and the Clinton campaign knew that this was a bogus story from the very beginning. I mean, it was completely made up out of thin air. It was fabricated. It was false. And so you take a step to Mueller and you go, how did Mueller, take a year's time and investigate this with billions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars to investigate something that the FBI already knew was false? In 2020, Peter Strzok worked at the FBI, one of the lead investigators on Crossfire Hurricane, which was the name given to the Trump investigation, said Donald Trump is compromised. He said that in 2020. He knew damn well Donald Trump didn't do anything with Russia. Adam Schiff, the head of the Intelligence Committee in the House, for all 4 years of the Trump presidency was saying, I have information. I'm the intelligence chair. I have information that can corroborate the news reports that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia. All of it fake and false.
Yeah, they totally smeared him with really the worst kind of smear, you know, that it's basically treason, really. I mean, it's treasonous stuff.
This week on Bourbon Moth Woodworking, I'm gonna make this bench.
Hey. I said I'd make the bench for you. I didn't say you could take over the entire video. That's my thing. This week on Bourbon Moth Woodworking, I'm gonna show you how I made this octagonal bench for some no-name celebrity. So follow along, see how I did it. Hello?
Mr. Hibbs, it's Mr. Patrick Harris. How are you?
Patrick Harris? Sorry, man, I don't know any Patrick Harris. Wrong number. Hello?
Jason, it's Neil Patrick Harris. How's it going?
Who?
Neil Patrick Harris. I'm an actor. I've been on your podcast.
Oh, yeah, the kid doctor guy, right?
Yeah, I love that reference. I have an opportunity for you, and I thought it might be cool. I'm trying to make a bench, an outside bench, and there's some specifics. Is that something that you might theoretically be interested in?
Who is this again?
Oh my God. It's Neil Patrick Harris. I'm on Instagram as well. My husband and I are celebrating our 17th wedding anniversary, and the year for 17 is furniture. And so I thought it might be cool to make an octagonal bench that goes around a tree, and it seems like you're like the perfect guy to make some cool custom piece. What do you say?
Where do you live again?
I live in New York, in upstate New York.
Ah, man, I don't really do work out of state. It's a long ways away. I got trees and wood and stuff.
I can pay you in bourbon.
Yeah, man. What are we building? Because Neil lives on the opposite side of the country from me, I needed to find a wood shop on the East Coast where I could build this bench as well as get some much needed help. So I called my good friend Keith Johnson of Keith Johnson Woodworks. He's an amazing woodworker and even a more amazing friend. Keith was able to procure a forest's worth of sapele lumber for us to build the bench out of. Sapele is great for outdoor furniture because it's hard, rot resistant, bug resistant, and you don't even have to finish it. You just set it outside and let nature naturally gray it, kind of like Neil Patrick Harris's hair. Anyways, with Keith on board, we got to work, first moving all of our lumber out of the way so that we could start breaking it down into our individual parts. Now, the design for this bench is an octagon that will wrap around the base of a tree. So unlike a traditional piece of furniture where each piece you have to make once or twice, for this project we have to make each piece 8 times. So we started breaking down the lumber and labeling each piece carefully. Then, once we got our 8 individual pieces, I taped them all together in stacks and labeled the stack. The last thing we want to do is get things mixed up. That would just make our life that much harder. And that's pretty much how we spent our first day. Rough cutting pieces, labeling them, and, well, rough cutting some more. We did this for multiple reasons. 1, just to ensure we had enough lumber to build the entire bench, and 2, it freed up some much needed space inside Keith's shop. With all of our pieces cut down roughly to size, I took this plywood template that we made for the shape of the back leg, and I started tracing it onto our 8-quarter sapele stock. Once I had all the legs traced out, I took them over to Keith's bandsaw, and I started roughly cutting them out, making sure to leave a 1/16 to an 1/8 of an inch outside my pencil line. We'll clean this all up over on the router table here in just a little bit. Speaking of the router table, as I was busy cutting out the legs on the bandsaw, Keith was busy inventing this genius router table sled. This would allow us to hold each rough cut piece firmly in place with the template as a guide and run it through the router table. So Keith chalked up a nice, beefy, spiral downcut bit with a top mounted bearing, and we just started going to town on these legs. Nice and slow. First we do one side, and then once that side was all cut, all we had to do was pop the piece out, move it over to the other side, re-clamp it down, reposition our clamps for the template, and run it through on the other side. Keith is an absolute master when it comes to jigs like this. It's just in his blood. So we just started routing until we had all of our legs nicely cut out and looking pretty smooth. I don't often work with other people on projects, but I gotta tell you, it was pretty darn nice. I mean, I basically just stood around and let Keith do all the work while I napped. I'm just kidding. We traded off back and forth, cutting out the legs, and in no time we had all 8 legs cut and ready to go. Next, it was time to start milling down some lumber to make our frame assemblies. These frames would hold each leg to one another and hopefully create a perfect octagon. So we ran a bunch of wood through the joiner, and then we cut it to size over on the table saw. And then of course there was more chopping of each piece down to its appropriate size and labeling them accordingly. Keith got crazy. He started just doing 2 pieces at once. He is a madman. And as he would cut them, I would label them. FL stands for front leg, in case you were wondering. And pretty soon we had all of our individual pieces cut for our legs and our frame assembly. We were getting along great, and the project was moving just swimmingly. The next thing we had to do was create some sort of jig template thing that we could use to work on the joinery for all of our leg pieces. So we took another plywood template that was the exact shape of our leg, and we drilled a bunch of holes in it. Then we took some more plywood pieces and we used double-sided tape to adhere them to that plywood template. Then, screwing through the holes, we attached those separate pieces directly to Keith's outfeed table, making this beautiful jig here. We had some plywood guides for our domino joiner and the shape of our leg on the inside. This allowed us to clip our back leg on this side here, then clip our front leg on this side here. Then we could hit the domino joiner from both sides, ensuring that all of our mortises were drilled out in the exact right location. Then we could plop in our cross braces for our front and back leg and do the same thing. Hit them with the domino joiner on both sides, making sure that everything would be lined up nice and perfectly. At least that's the goal, right? So with our jig all figured out, me and Keith got to work mortising out all of our pieces. Keith would do one side, then hop the domino joiner over to me, and I would do the other side. We'd drill first with the domino joiner flat to the outfeed table, then plop a piece of 3/8 inch plywood to raise it up and drill again, giving us 2 perfectly mortised out holes for 2 sets of dominoes side by side. And in no time, all of our leg pieces were drilled out and ready to hook together. Before we glued anything up, however, we dry assembled each leg piece just to make sure that everything fit together perfectly and was uniformly the same size across the board, as you can see in this wonderfully edited little montage of us putting all 8 leg pieces together. You know, when you think about it, this is basically just a chair in itself. Not too bad. What would you like for Christmas, little boy? So with all of our leg pieces dry assembled, it was time to start gluing them up for real. For this, we used Total Boat's Thick Sew. This is a 2-part epoxy that magically mixes itself right in the tip. It's also nice because it's thick, so it doesn't run all over the place. We decided to go with epoxy for our joinery because this was going to be an outside piece of furniture, and well, epoxy apparently does great for outside furniture. So with our holes filled with epoxy, that didn't sound right. Me and Keith started plopping each individual leg assembly together. Man, it is so refreshing to be able to work with someone else in the shop. Glue ups are just a breeze. We'd glue, we'd clamp, we'd ensure that each part was square, and well, we'd do the entire process over again. 8 times in total until we had all of our legs nicely clamped together. Now all we had to do was wait for our glue to dry. While we waited for our glue to dry, we started cutting all of our pieces for our frame assembly. Now each leg is going to be held to one another with an internal frame. This is going to tie everything together, making our octagon, and allow us to take the whole thing apart to get it around the tree. So after cutting each piece, Keith started marking them out for our dominoes. And this is where we got a little crazy. Just like our leg assembly, we wanted to stack 2 dominoes, one on top of each other in each joint. So Keith was going to use the smaller domino joiner, and I would use the larger one. He would drill out a hole at the top of each joint with the small 500 domino joiner, and when he was done, he would hand the piece to me, and I would drill out the secondary hole lower down using the larger domino joiner and our fancy little plywood clamping jig, which worked amazing, by the way. We should really market these things because, I mean, it's basically like a Craig jig for the domino joiner, but hey, if it works, it works. So once again, enjoying the benefits of working with someone else to share the load, we just started working our way through all of the frame assembly pieces. There was 8 frames in total. Each frame consisted of 5 separate pieces, so you'd think this would take a while, but we had each one mortised out in no time and started dry assembling them together. Once again, just to double check and make sure everything fit the way it was supposed to, and all of our seams lined up correctly. Because none of our frame pieces were square, I knew clamping was going to be a trick, so I made some clamping cauls to glue on the outside of each piece, as well as these interior cauls that would allow us to clamp everything together, ensuring that it all stayed nice and flush. So with our clamping somewhat figured out, it was back to our Total Boat thickened epoxy to glue everything up. We tried our best not to get any epoxy on the 12 cats that randomly frequent Keith's shop from time to time. I keep telling him not to leave the garage door open, but tell you what, he just doesn't listen. So again, working together as the dream team that we had become, we started hooking all of our frame pieces together. We would fill each hole with epoxy, get them roughly in place, put some clamps on the top, some clamps on the bottom to push in our side pieces, and some clamps with these interior clamping cauls to bring those side pieces out flush with our top and bottom brace pieces. If you're confused, I mean, join the club. So am I. With glue ups like this, you just try and get enough clamps on there to make sure everything's got adequate pressure and do what works. By the next morning, our epoxy was dry, so I started stripping the clamps and popping off our cauls. I just glued the cauls on with a little CA glue sandwiched between some green tape, because Keith loves his green tape. And with our lower frames done, it was time to start working on the frames for our back supports. These were a little bit trickier. Because the back slanted at 10 degrees in towards the tree, we had a lot more angles to deal with. Our side pieces were cut at 22.5 degrees, and our top and bottom pieces were cut at 10 degrees. So before we actually started hooking our frame pieces together for the backs, we decided we should roughly put our entire octagon assembly together just to make sure that we were correct with our angles and such. Now eventually this will all be held together with carriage bolts, but in the meantime we just decided to use clamps. Now we were thoughtful about our process in building this whole thing. You see, it's an octagon, which means it's 8-sided, which means you take off at one point, make 8 right-handed turns, and hopefully end up at the same point. But we were a little unsure on whether or not our math would compute. So when we put the whole thing together, we purposely did not build our 8th section. We left that one open. We figured we would custom make that one at the very end after we ensured that it would fit properly. So with 7 of our 8 sides done, we took measurements on our last piece and we handmade everything, but we custom fit our last frame piece to size. You know, we were only off 1/8 of an inch, which isn't bad considering that means we were only off about a 64th of an inch on each section up to that point. Not too bad in my book. So we made our last piece 1/8 of an inch bigger, and it slid in absolutely perfectly. With that, our entire lower structure of the octagon bench was done, and we were ready to start working on the frames for our seat backs. So we started by making one frame piece, cut all of our pieces to size, and I just hooked them together with a little CA glue, just to test and see if they fit. Once we knew that it would fit properly, well, then we could make all the other frames the exact same size. So Keith took a mallet and busted apart all my hard work, and we used each individual piece as a template to cut out our remaining 8 seat frame parts. I would label them, hand them to Keith, and he would cut them to size. We were an unstoppable piece cutting machine, if I do say so myself, and this is my voiceover so I can say whatever the flip I want. With all of our pieces cut, we started laying them out and marking them for our dominoes. Once again, I had to make some fancy calls to ensure that we could clamp everything together because the sides were angled and the entire thing tapered from top to bottom. It was a trick, but we got it done and started sending in our dominoes. Just one set on the back because this was a lot thinner. Ew, gross, man. Ugh, people are watching. In no time, we had all 8 of our frame pieces dry fit and ready to glue up. Unfortunately, we ran out of our beloved thickened epoxy, so for gluing up our frame pieces, we had to switch to just plain Jane Total Boat 2-part epoxy. It worked just as good, it's just a bit more runny, so obviously we're going to have a little more cleanup after our glue dries. epoxy dries, whatever this stuff is called. With all of our joints glued, I plopped on my fancy clamping cauls and we put everything in clamps. And we just kept doing this back and forth until we had all 8 of our frame pieces glued up. Next thing we had to do was figure out our upper octagonal shelf thingamabob. This is kind of the cap for the entire bench that will sit on top of our leg assembly pieces and hug the tree, if you will. We needed to figure out a way that we could hook this together without fully hooking it together, because obviously if it was fully hooked together, we weren't going to be able to get it around the tree when we went to deliver the piece. So Keith sent some dominoes in on each side of our pieces, and then he used this fancy lamello plate joiner thingamabob. I'd never seen one of these before, but it's kind of like a biscuit joiner on steroids. You mortise out a slot for a fancy plastic clip, you drill a hole in the bottom of the piece that you can get an Allen key into, then you slide in a clip on one side, add your dominoes that are going to hook the whole joint together, and you slide in a clip on the other side. Then all you have to do is push your seam together using those dominoes for alignment and insert an Allen key into our pre-drilled hole. This engages a little clip inside that mortised out hole thing, and it tightens the entire joint together. This would allow us not only to take it apart when we assemble it, but it will also allow us to glue up each half without the use of any clamps. Pretty genius if you ask me. So I measured out a little more Total Boat epoxy, and then I spent some time milking Keith. That's awkward. Then we glued up 2 halves of the octagon shelf. I'd insert some epoxy, insert the clips, insert the dominoes, and tighten everything down, making sure not to glue up our final seams, because that's what we would use to, well, take it apart and hopefully slide it smoothly around our tree. So as you can see here, we have our 2 halves glued up. We put our last halves together without epoxy, and we tighten it down, creating a perfectly made octagonal shelf thingamabob. But hold on, ladies and gentlemen, we're not finished yet. The next day, after the epoxy was dry, Keith took the entire piece over to a friend of his, Mike, at Veteran Wood Co. He's got this crazy cutting robot thing. I think they call it a CNC, if I'm not mistaken. Using the CNC, he carved out the Roman numerals for 17 in 4 of our 8 sides, because this was a present for Neil's 17th wedding anniversary. Then after carving out all of the Roman numerals, he again used his magic robot to cut out a perfect circle on the interior of the octagon. This would just make a cleaner transition from bench to tree. At least that was our plan. So while Keith was busy just standing around watching a robot do all his work for him, I stayed home and actually got some real work done. Now that our entire assembly was done for all of the framework for our bench, we needed to start making it look like a finished piece. So I slowly and meticulously took apart our entire bench and labeled each piece so we could get it back together